Hello, my name is Rob Reynolds. Welcome to Mat-073. Today we're going to get our third section of Chapter 7, and it's the quadratic formula. Now, there's a lot of ways to memorize the song. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All over 2a is the quadratic formula. But there's quite a few songs out there. I'll play a couple for you.
The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
That's probably the most common song. Here's an Adele song.
Solve for x, it's negative quadratic formula.
And one last one I thought was pretty nice.
Square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now you know quadratic formula.
So it doesn't really matter what song or what tune you sing it to. It's all the same. I kind of like not to pronounce this negative b. Sometimes I pronounce this the opposite of b. Because if this term is negative, the opposite of a negative is positive. So it's not always a negative number out here. That might be a positive number. So this is already, our first example is already in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Sometimes it's helpful for students to go ahead and identify a, b, and c before they begin this process. So for this one we have x is equal to, well, I'll write the formula again, negative b plus or minus this, I should sing it, but then you'd probably turn the video off. So x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of b squared. I like to just go ahead and square that. I'll show you why in a little bit later on the next example. Well, I'll show you now. I like to square it because if b is negative, negative 4 squared does not equal negative 4 quantity squared. So be careful how you type that into the calculator. This is negative 16 and this is positive 16. So if we just square it, this term will always be positive. And sometimes students forget to put parentheses around it and they end up with the wrong answer underneath the radical. 4 and then a and c all divided by 2a. So x is equal to negative 9 plus or minus the square root of, my next suggestion, well, a is a 2 here, so this becomes a 4. So sorry, I should have gone 2 times 2. My next suggestion would be pull out a calculator and just type in what's underneath that radical. In my case, I've got 81 minus 4 times 2 times negative 5, and that's 121. Which is negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 121, which is 11. And then we'll write this as two different problems. It's negative 9 plus 11 divided by 4, or negative 9 minus 11 divided by 4. This is either 2/4, which you know is 1/2, or negative 20/4, which reduces to negative 5. Here's how the author solves it. Again, I would take the whole, everything underneath the radical and punch it into the calculator. Doing mental math sometimes gets students in trouble. So if you have access to a calculator, I'd recommend that. But the author is getting the same solution and has a good suggestion for you as well. Make sure you know that it's all divided by 2a, not just that last term. So remember, the strategies here for completing the square, there are easier ways to solve for quadratics. Probably the easiest way to solve for quadratics is factoring. So I wouldn't use the quadratic formula for everything. One of the lessons that we learned in section 7.1 said that if we had something as a binomial squared, the easiest way to solve for this is just take the square root of it. So if you haven't watched any previous videos to solve for quadratics, I would definitely look at those before trying to solve by the quadratic formula. In section 7.2, we learned a technique for solving for quadratic, which is called completing the square. Some students really like that. I'm not a big fan of it. And the nice thing about the quadratic formula is that factoring doesn't always work. It can't always be factored, but you can always use the quadratic formula. So it's less frustrating for students to try to figure out whether it can work or not. So let me give you an example of how to put this into standard form first. The first thing we need to do is put this in decreasing order. So I'm going to rewrite this and set it equal to 0. And then I'll identify the value of A, B, and C. Again, it's nice that B was positive, so I don't think we'll have a problem plugging into the formula. Okay, I'll see. X is equal to negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. There, I sang it once for you. Okay, so X is equal to negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared, 12 squared, minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times 1, value of A. So negative 12 plus or minus the square root of, and again, I'm busting out my calculator here. And I'm going to punch in 144 minus 4 times negative 4, getting 160. Now, 160 is not a perfect square, but I can see that it's 16 times 10. So I think I can simplify this to be negative 12 plus or minus 4 square roots of 10 over 2. And this gets students in trouble all the time. You cannot cancel part of a sum. So we can't cancel just the 12 and the 2. But you can cancel both sums, or you could divide every term through by 2. So half of negative 12 is negative 6. Half of 4 is 2. And you do not touch the square root of 10. It's kind of like factoring out. Over here I could factor out over here I could factor out, a 4, but that's not, well, I'll factor out a 4 and I'll show you what happens. If you factor out a 4, you're left with negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 10. But the only thing that cancels is this 4 and this 2 goes 2 times, but then you would have to distribute the 2 again. So I'm not sure if that's the fastest method is to factor, because, well, unless you see an answer like this, but I don't think that that's simplified. That's equivalent, but I think the simplified version is negative 6. So the fastest way to cancel is just cancel like I did with the blue and factor each term. Let's see how the author chose to do it. Yeah. They broke it up into this A plus or minus BI, or kind of complex numbers forms, and worked it out separately. I kind of tend to work the problem together, but either way we get the same answer. So for this problem, I noticed that it's not in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So my first goal is to get it set equal to 0, and I'll do that by subtracting 2x from both sides. So the formula really is x squared minus 2x plus 7 equals 0. And this is the first example where your b term is negative. So you'll see if you just type in negative 2 and square it, you'll get a negative 4. And that's not b squared. You should have done negative 2 quantity squared and end up with a positive 4. So I would write that as x is equal to the opposite of b, and the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. So we really should be singing the song x is equal to opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared. And then I'm going to do b squared. I'm going to write it right here, because if I do that in my calculator and forget to put the parentheses in, I'll get wrong answers as well. So b squared minus 4 times a is 1, c is 7, all over 2 times 1, the value of a. And this is going to be x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of, bust out a calculator, and let's type in 4 minus 4 times 7, and get negative 24 divided by 2. which whenever I see the square root of a negative, an I pops out. That's an earlier lesson. This is really the square root of -1 times the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. If you'll let me write it like this. This is really 2 plus or minus I. The square root of 4 is 2, and square root of 6 is divided by 2. So then I'm going to use that earlier technique that I showed you. We're going to divide both terms, not just one term, but both terms. And by the way, we do have two terms here. Terms are separated by addition and subtraction. So 2 is the first term, and then 2i square root of 6 is the second term. So when I divide through by 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, plus or minus I square roots of 6. Now it's divided by 1, so that's my final solution in that a plus bi form, which the author likes as well. So using your calculator to type this in, I've been kind of doing this all along. Make sure that the negative key is the white key. When you type in a -6, you can say plus 2 square roots of 10. And by the way, you can hit second enter for a recall key, and just back up and change that plus into a minus. So again, second enter will recall that, and you'll get your two solutions very quickly. So 0.32 and -12.32. I hope you found this video helpful. Please email me if you have questions.